This week in the enterprise security news, Acunetix new data retention policies, 5 things you should ask your web app pen testing provider, Microsoft's open source tool for sniffing out Windows 10 bugs, Datadog unveils support for distributed tracing for AWS, and Gravwell's Data Fusion platform breaks the mold of legacy data ingestion engines. In our second segment, Ferro Mavatuna, the CEO of NetSparker, discusses current security needs of modern enterprise companies. In our final segment, we welcome Jimmy Mesta, Director of Security Research at Signal Sciences, to discuss securing enterprise digital transformations. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Today, every business is a digital business. Most of us are migrating workloads to the cloud, adopting DevOps tools, rolling out RPA software, and supporting a remote workforce. While opportunity is great, so is the risk of advanced cyber attacks. Many high-profile breaches start with a compromise of privileged credentials. CyberArk is the #1 leader in privileged access management. Talk to CyberArk today to secure privileged access for humans and machines across hybrid and cloud environments and on endpoints. Learn more at securityweekly.com/CyberArk and stay one step ahead of the attackers. Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Welcome to episode 199 of Enterprise Security Weekly for September 16th, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Happy Wednesday, Paul.
Yes.
Boy, it's Wednesday already. Whew.
Weeks flying by. John Strand had some stuff going on for Wild West Hackin' Fest, so hopefully many of you are virtually attending that conference as well. Which is awesome. You can also join the Security Weekly mailing list for webcast virtual training announcements, receive your personal invite to our Discord server, and subscribe to all of our shows on securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, if you have a guest suggestion or topic for the show, you can submit those at securityweekly.com/guests. On to the enterprise security news for this week. Matt, where do you want to start?
Well, I added a couple funding announcements.
Yeah,
there's
let's
a
go
lot
through
of
those.
a lot of application security stuff in here. So the first one was Snick, however you want to say it. It's been pronounced both ways. They raised $200 million, and this is after already raising $150 million back in January. So they've raised $350 million this year. They now have a valuation of about $2.6 billion. So yeah, what a raise.
They're doing well. Well, I mean, their product is important. If you're developing applications, basically, is what it boils down to, right?
Yeah. You know, they were a sponsor on Application Security Weekly. I know they're in this hiring spree right now. I mean, they talk about it in the article of how much hiring they've done. They're bringing some new marketing folks on. So I think we'll get a chance to do some more work with them next year on ASW. But I love what they do from a visualization perspective with the dependencies in open source and other libraries, which I think is great. It looks like they're going to also use some of this money to go into some adjacency areas. So it'll be interesting to see what new functionality they bring. Yeah.
Right. StackRox, happy to see them make that. I mean, they really, with StackRox, I think it was more of a pivot. Sneak will be more of an expansion of their portfolio. StackRox made a very, I think, a pivot into Kubernetes security. And I think it was a great bet for them, right? I mean, because you take a chance on all this technology that is still very new. And while we love to talk about Kubernetes and how everyone is using it, right? It's not necessarily the case. Everyone's on our interview with Jimmy Mester will talk about the various stages of the journey that people are on, right? But StackRox, I think, made a great pivot into Kubernetes.
Yeah, they really needed to. Remember, they were one of the early container security companies out there. I competed with them when we were at Layered Insight. We had very different approaches. But when you had Aqua, Twistlock, Layered Insight, you know, 2 of the 3 of those exited, you know, where was the future for StackRox? They pivoted, said, look, we're going to double down on Kubernetes. It was a good time to double down on Kubernetes because that's right around the same time Docker decided to support Kubernetes and kind of put a fork in Swarm, their own orchestration tool. So it was a good timing, and they've been able to capitalize on the growth of Kubernetes. You now see a lot of new startups going after Kubernetes security, but they're probably a little further behind than what StackRox is because StackRox made that pivot a little earlier.
Let's stay on the application security theme for a bit. Acunetix has released a really big update, actually, to their product, their web application scanner. Lots of new features, largely around scan result management, archiving scans, deleting archive scans, things of that nature. Some new vulnerability checks, including one for SAP NetWeaver, which I thought was interesting. We don't often see companies outside of Onapsis talking about SAP security, so it was good to see that landing in other scanners as well. Also a check for the Cisco ASA path traversal. Cisco's had a number of advisories lately on their products, and many of them relate back to web application vulnerabilities on the management aspect of their various gear. WordPress, core themes and plugins, Drupal and Joomla. Always a slew of vulnerabilities in the CMS platforms out there as well. Bug fixes as well as a lot of updates for just a whole host of things. So it was good. Oh, and their core engine went to Chromium version 83. That's no small feat because things changed in that. I had to do some things there. I think I had to go to a previous version when I was using Chromium with Selenium. So that's good.
Yeah, all good announcements. I mean, obviously, you know, it's interesting with NetSparker and Acunetix, all part of the same entity. It's every time I see one or the other, it's like, okay, how many of these, you know, are just dedicated to that, or they're actually broader, probably enhancements to both the NetSparker and the Acunetix platform. We've got Farah coming on next, so we might be able to ask him a bit.
Right. CrowdStrike Store continues momentum with a diverse platform. So Illumio, Obsidian, and Security Advisor are in the CrowdStrike Store, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is really interesting from a marketplace perspective. You've got CrowdStrike as kind of one of the leading, if not the leader in endpoint detection and response, adding these additional capabilities to the Falcon platform through these strategic partnerships. Automox announced some patching capabilities in the store earlier this year. Now you're starting to see other strategic partnerships coming in where I can take my Illumio data and some of these other solutions and start to snap them into the broader Falcon platform. Very similar to what ServiceNow and other platforms have done over the years, really expanding the footprint for Falcon, but also the strategic value of the CrowdStrike platform longer term, because with these integrations, they got a lot more contextual data that they can leverage on the platform.
I like the integration of Obsidian too. Security for your SaaS applications is huge right now, and to be able to have that data integrated and have that coverage is so important today. And it's not always easy to do at all when we talk about these SaaS platforms.
Right. Yeah, they're pretty unique. How much visibility can you get into some of these SaaS platforms? Depends on what's available. So, you know, whatever you can get, great. Provide some additional context. Right now, I can take endpoint data, correlate that with maybe the SaaS platform that user is accessing, and really get some more intel there about, does something look malicious? Does something look suspicious? I think those are great add-ons.
If you have web applications and you're interested in a web app pen test, BugCrowd had a pretty good article about some questions you should be asking to scope that project accurately, which I thought was good in a somewhat independent source as well from BugCrowd, right? Doing the bug bounty thing. I think they're in a good position to recommend how you should approach having your web app pen test done. Something is beeping. Something is not muted that should be. I think their first question is valid, right? How, when you engage with a firm to do a web app pen test, do you make sure you're getting the right talent and or different talent every time you do the test? And I think this is particularly important in web applications because there are so many different frameworks, languages, and not everyone can be an expert in every single one. I'd say missing from the list is how they're going to test in terms of which environment, right? Do you spin up an environment just for them? Back before we were having all these conversations about DevOps and implementing it in various ways, it was always like, well, they're going to have to test in production because, our QA environment is tied up. Now that we can spin up environments much more easily, again, depending on where you are in your journey with each of your applications, now I think it's pretty easy. Like you could basically spin up an instance and have your testers work on that instance and not worry about disrupting production data.
Yeah, I think there's some scoping questions in here that are like, to that point, right, Paul? Am I going to test production? You're going to spin up an own environment. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be linked into your SOC? Could I set off alarms? Right. I mean, there's some interesting scoping questions that weren't here. I mean, these were higher level questions, but there's some interesting scoping questions to understand the potential downstream impact as you're doing the pen test of, well, is the SOC going to get notified? Am I testing some of those processes to see if your processes are catching me, doing the penetration test or not? So those weren't in here either.
Well, where else did you want to go from here? There's lots of articles. I ended up with more than I thought I was.
Yeah, there was one acquisition that the Threat Connect and Nehemiah Security acquisition I thought was a little interesting. I know the Nehemiah Security folks. I spent some time with them when I was doing my hiatus between Tenable and Layered Insight, so I knew some of the people that were there. What I find a little interesting, so Nehemiah Security bought Triumphant. Do you remember the Triumphant conversations back at Tenable? It was the endpoint solution that Mantech had.
No, that was after I left.
Okay. So Mantech was looking to sell off their endpoint technology, which was the Triumphant product. And we took a pretty heavy look at it when I was at Tenable to bring some endpoint capabilities potentially into the portfolio. And we passed on it. Nehemiah Security ended up buying it. And they were building out some broader capabilities, but then they kind of pivoted to this whole concept of cyber risk quantification. And if you've tracked the market in these value at risk quantification platforms, they've all struggled in some form or fashion. I mean, we've seen so many of them pop up and then kind of go away. I think RiskLens is the only one that's had, any track record in the space at all. Here in Nehemiah Security, the assets are being acquired by Threat Quotient. So my question is, is this one of those kind of struggling with this whole concept of value at risk quantification where there's just still not a market for it and therefore you sell?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me, Matt. And I think it's another reason why I really love the team and the product at Vicarious. And because I think they're super aggressive about how they're helping you understand risk and prioritize, right? And they're like, you shouldn't have to plug in a bunch of data and really overanalyze everything. You should leave it to a lot of the automated processes that'll tell you what's in your environment and what's most important. And I think they've done a great job in doing that.
Yeah. Let's see. One login is just a use case. It's not really a press release. I was really confused why this ended up as a press release. This is a great use case on your website. Don't waste your PR dollars doing something like this. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Gotcha.
The Threat Quotient integration with Polarity. Polarity sponsor on Pulse Security Weekly. Integration of the Threat Quotient data to visualize it, I thought was an interesting announcement. I don't know how much you've spent with Paul and the team over at Polarity in some of their visualizations yet. I know they just kind of came on board, but it'd be interesting to see how they visualize some of this data.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great use case. I mean, the two together, right? Your threat intelligence platform coupled with the instant intelligence that Polarity can give you in correlations, I thought was a good story.
Yep. Let's see. Gravwell Fusion, again, sponsor on Paul's Security Weekly, so I don't know if Corey's shown some of this off in their Big Bang release.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah, he came on the show and talked about that, so...
Okay.
Yeah, if you're reading that article, you can go dig up that interview we did with Corey, and we actually got a first sneak peek at all of these features. And I think that from a higher level, the kits are the thing that they mentioned in the article, right? It's just making it super easy for you to snap in things and not manually build a whole bunch of queries yourself. So definitely check that out. Yep,
that's great. Exabeam and Code 42 announced detection and response. So this one's interesting. I had an opportunity to get a briefing with Code 42 because we've covered them
on this
whole concept of insider threat. Remember, we were like, wait, Code 42, that's a backup and recovery software solution. They don't do insider threat. Well, that prompted the Code 42 folks to reach out to me to say, can we educate you? I'm like, sure.
Yes, please.
Right? Yeah. And so I did get some time to talk with the product marketing team. And, Code 42 realized that backup recovery by itself was not going to be a long-term strategy. So years ago, a few years back, they actually started to make a switch into leveraging their endpoint agent that was doing backup and restore capabilities to expand endpoint capabilities on the inbox. And so they've slowly been doing this. They haven't done a great job of marketing it, I don't think, to the security community, which is we're still in some conversations with them. But this seems a lot like the conversation we had with Tanium and Chronicle, right? You take some endpoint capabilities that Code 42 has, you bring them to Exabeam, which is kind of that SIEM, and you're starting to create that sensor brain discussion, right? To go after some of these broader detection and response use cases.
Excellent. That explains that helps.
Yep.
Microsoft is announced an open source fuzzing tool, Project OneFuzz, designed to automatically detect software security vulnerabilities. It was used internally at Microsoft, and now it's available as open source, which is so strange to just say Microsoft and open source still in the same sentence like that. And just props to the Microsoft team. They're doing some amazing things, including really embracing open source, which is a huge pivot for the company from its early days.
Oh, I mean, gigantic. I mean, come on, to put a Linux kernel in Windows. I mean, come on.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Thycotic is automating and extending privilege access for DevOps environments. We've had a lot of conversations about this, about the identity companies, pivoting into DevOps, because you need that.
So this is a project for you. So I think this is one you should dig into a little bit, because we know we've got to do some stuff with our secrets management for our application. You should look at a few of these, right? I know CyberArk with the Conjure acquisition, you've got Thycotic, you've got a few others that are out there. Be interesting to dig into some of these different capabilities and what works for us, what doesn't work. I think it would be a pretty good tech segment, because this is a space we're going to see continue to evolve. And we have the perfect kind of application with the way we have to manage secrets and keys. You can probably provide some good feedback to the audience on what stuff is working, what stuff's not.
Yeah, it's challenging. I thought the Sumed did a great job of explaining the importance of that on, I believe it was the last Paul Security Weekly. We talked about that. And without giving away too much of the secret sauce in all of our own applications, you need a secrets vault, and you're probably going to have more than one as your application grows, right? And that has to be integrated into all of your other identity services as well. And something that you want to take out of the developer's hand and have someone else manage, right? Is the strategy that I've been hearing. You don't want to burden the developer with, how do I get the key? Where do I get the key? It should just be well documented. And another team, a different team, should be managing those secrets, right?
And that's why I like the CyberArk solution that I think we interviewed them on this show a few weeks back. I think there's some really great opportunities to get them out of the developer's hands, put them in a solution, have them managed there, and then, the developers don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. That's the goal. Device Authority is releasing a new version of IoT security platform with support for Microsoft Azure Sphere. I'm not familiar with Device Authority, but I am familiar with Azure Sphere, and it's a really great platform for building an IoT solution.
Yeah. John Kinsella has been doing a lot of research into Sphere. Now that he's up in Seattle, he's been spending a lot of time trying to get his arms around this, because we know that IoT and managing these devices at the edge, and Sphere is part of one of those solutions to build these capabilities in the Azure cloud environment. He's been doing a lot of research here. At some point, we should have him dig into some of these different solutions and who's doing what, right? Because what I can't tell, Paul, is what value does Device Authority give me in
on top of
Sphere? Right.
Yeah.
That's my problem.
I agree. And this is more for the companies that are developing an IoT solution that they're going to sell, not so much for enterprise security.
Right.
At least is what I've learned so far.
Yes. Zscaler releases new data protection innovations in Zscaler Zero Trust Exchange. So when I hear Zero Trust Exchange, I instantly think Edgewise. But I don't think the Edgewise pieces are in here. But I believe the CloudNeedy acquisition pieces are in here as part of their CSPM announcement in here. So this brings together 3 services: CASB, Cloud Security Posture Management, and Cloud Browser Isolation. And the Cloud Browser Isolation sounds a lot like Silo, the Authenticate product.
Yep.
Because it looks like it's streaming the video to the browser, so it looks like a very competitive solution with Silo. But the CSPM is definitely the CloudNeedy acquisition from earlier this year. So you're starting to see them come together in the Zscaler platform.
I did not know Zscaler had a cloud browser isolation platform.
I did not either until this announcement.
Interesting. Datadog might be the last story that we haven't covered yet.
Yeah, pretty close. Yep. More back to the application stuff.
Yeah.
This is interesting because this is leveraging AWS X-Ray to get visibility into AWS Step Functions and Lambda, right?
So wait, what's X-Ray? I've heard the term thrown around. I don't remember. I can't keep all the AWS services.
It's one of their services that provide. It's kind of like Guard Duty. X-Ray was part of that announcement. You've got CloudWatch, CloudTrail. It's these different services to provide visibility into different services. So my understanding with X-Ray is it gives you some visibility into what's going on in Lambda. So as you start to think about moving certain capabilities into Lambda functions, the big question is, well, how do I get visibility into what's going on in Lambda? If I run my function in a container in Lambda, then my container security product could give me some visibility of what's going on in that function. But what if you deploy a function without a container? How do you get visibility? And it looks like what Datadog's done is tied into X-Ray to give you some of that visibility so you can see what's going on at the function layer.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, and as we think about moving some of our capabilities in our software into Lambda, it'd be really interesting to see what X-Ray and or Datadog gives us in what's going on in those functions.
Yep. Agreed. Cool. Well, that rounds out the news for this week. Interviews coming up next. Stay tuned.